मित्रों नमस्कार। अब कार्यक्रम की हम शुरुआत करते हैं। धीरे धीरे लोग ज्वाइन हो रहे हैं क्योंकि रजिस्ट्रेशन हमने मैंडेटरी रखा हुआ है इसके लिए। तो मैं एक बार जीजेपीसी की तरफ से हमारे आज के जो मुख्य स्पीकर हैं, जिनको हमने इस एफटीए के ऊपर अपना अभिभाषण देने के लिए यहाँ पे निमंत्रित किया हुआ है, श्री निशांत जी का, संजय नोटारी जी, दोनों जो ईएलपी से हैं। ईएलपी के बारे में मुझे नहीं लगता है कि जो ऑडियंस यहाँ पे है मैं उनको किसी प्रकार को अलग से परिचय देने की दरकार है। तो मैं दोनों एक्सपर्ट्स का यहाँ पे जीजेपीसी की तरफ से हार्दिक स्वागत एवं अभिनंदन करता हूँ। नमस्कार सर। मैं जीजेपीसी के जो मेंबर्स यहाँ जुड़ चुके हैं और जो साइमल्टेनियसली जुड़ रहे हैं उनका भी मैं जीजेपीसी हार्दिक स्वागत एवं अभिनंदन करती है। मित्रों, जैसा कि आप सब जानते हैं कि अभी रिसेंटली ही एफटीए साइन हुआ है और भी कंट्रीज के साथ में हमारा एफटीए साइन होने के प्रोसेस में है, जो भारत सरकार साइन कर रही है। उसका पूरा एक ओवरव्यू आज इस सेमिनार में आपको जानने को मिलेगा। और इसके पहले कि मैं अपने जो मुख्य स्पीकर्स हैं उनको हम इनवाइट करें, मैं आप सबको बताना चाहूंगा कि एफटीए का जो सबमिशन हमने भारत सरकार को किया हुआ है जीजेपीसी के तरफ से, उसके बारे में हमारी जीजेपीसी की रश्मि अरोड़ा जो है इस पे थोड़ा प्रकाश डालेंगी और उसका विवरण आपके पास देने के बाद में फिर हम जो है मूल जो हमारा आज का जो कार्यक्रम है उस पे हम आएंगे। कार्यक्रम के अंत में प्रश्नोत्तर का कार्यक्रम होगा। जो भी आपके क्वेश्चंस हो, आप सबसे मेरा आग्रह रहेगा कि आप Q&A में अपने क्वेश्चंस को रखें, जिससे कार्यक्रम के इस अंत में हम आपके प्रश्नों को लेकर के एक एक करके उसका आंसर देते रहें। तो मैं कार्यक्रम में पहले प्रेजेंटेशंस के लिए मैं रश्मि अरोड़ा को कहता हूं कि आप प्रेजेंट करें, और मैं जीजेपीसी की तरफ से एक बार फिर मिथिलेश पांडे और हमारी कलीग मिनाली, आप सबका हार्दिक स्वागत एवं अभिनंदन करते हैं। थैंक यू सो मच। रश्मि, आप जो है प्रेजेंटेशन स्टार्ट करें।
थैंक यू। मृणाली, आप शेयर कर सकते हैं क्या उधर से प्रेजेंटेशन?
जी, मैं कर देती हूँ।
मृणाली, ये वाला नहीं है, जस्ट अ मिनट, मृणाली।
Next option?
Yeah, no, this is not.
शेयर कर रही हूँ वहां से रश्मि?
यस सर, मैं शेयर करती हूँ यहाँ से, जस्ट। So is this visible, Pandey ji? This presentation visible? Okay, thank you, Pandey ji, for your introduction, and good afternoon all, and especially to the panelists. So Nishant ji and Sanjay ji are here to give the detailed kind of presentation about the perspective of FTAs. I'm just here, as Pandey ji has said, like, what is the submission of GJAPC to the government? What actually is happening? Like the free trade agreements. So free trade agreement is what? That is the trade agreement between the two countries or between a region like ASEAN or NAFTA, or it may be at a multilateral level. So multilateral level trade agreements, multi-level agreements are settled in the WTO. So it's at the global level. So major objective of all such trade agreements, either at the multilateral level or at the regional level or at the bilateral level, the major objective is to enhance the trade, like ट्रेड को बढ़ाना, एक्सपोर्ट्स इंपोर्ट्स को बढ़ाना. सो मल्टीलेटरल पे WTO इसको कंप्लीट मॉनिटर करता है. उसके आगे आगे हम आए तो रीजनल लेवल लाइक आसियान और नाफ्ता. सो दिस इज द रीजनल ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट वेयर 2 or 3 countries they come together and try to reduce their tariffs so that their exports and imports can be increased. So this is absolutely in the interest of only few countries. So this is only a segment of the complete global level. Now the third is the bilateral. So we are coming to the bilateral trade agreements which are happening these days, and you must be reading in various newspapers like India, UAE, India, UK, India, Canada, or India, Australia. So all these trade agreements are happening at a very fast pace. And why so? So reason is like our Ministry of Commerce is quite aggressive these days to increase the trade, bilateral trade or the overall merchandise exports. So suppose in case of 2021-22, जो कंप्लीट टारगेट गवर्नमेंट ने रखा था $400 बिलियन का रखा था. बट अगर आप देखें पिछले 10 साल में हमारा एक्सपोर्ट्स जो है वो $300 और $320 के बीच में मूव कर रहा था. लेकिन आज के स्टेटस अगर हम देखेंगे, सो वी हैव अचीव नियरली $375 बिलियन. सो दिस इज अ हिस्टोरिक फिगर दैट वी हैव अचीव ड्यूरिंग April to February 2022. So because government wants to increase merchandise exports very fastly, but with a very huge gap, like suppose $400 billion target in 21-22, 22-23 target is $500 billion. So again 100 billion. Now 29-2030 government is aimed at achieving the exports of around $1 trillion. So for all these ambitious export targets like $400 billion, $500 billion, $1 trillion in coming years, in fact, जो हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स पिछले 10 साल से 300 बिलियन पर अटके हुए थे, आज वो हमने उसको क्रॉस कर दिया है. इट हैज कम नाउ $375 billion and we are expected to achieve around $410 billion, even over and above the targets. So what about the gem and jewelry export targets? So Ministry of Commerce has given the targets to all the councils for different sectors, including the gem and jewelry. So we were given the target of $42 billion for this financial year. $52 billion have been given by the ministry for this coming year, that is 22-23, and $100 billion like we have to achieve by 29-2030. So why such targets? Because gem and jewelry accounts for around 10% of the total exports. So accordingly, if you see, the proportion is simple and very simple calculation is there. So this is what the government is expecting from the gem and jewelry sector, and specifically from the Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council. Now, why we are discussing this? Because in order to achieve export target, there are various ways, and one way is the trade agreements. लाइक जिस कंट्री के साथ आप बायलैटरल ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट करते हैं वहां पे आपको ड्यूटी फ्री मिलता है और या फिर प्रेफरेंशियल ड्यूटी मिलता है. सपोज अगर यूएई में 5% आज की डेट में गोल्ड ज्वेलरी पर आपका इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी है, या तो वो फ्री हो रही है या फिर उसके ऊपर आपको प्रेफरेंशियल रेट मिलेगा, 5% नहीं तो 4% नहीं तो 3%, लाइक दिस. So now this is just an example. Now how signing, and when you get such kind of duty free access in other markets, say in UAE अगर आपके गोल्ड ज्वेलरी जो 5% है वो आपको नहीं पे करना पड़ता है वहाँ के इंपोर्टर्स को, और इन केस ऑफ ऑस्ट्रेलिया आपका ड्यूटी कम हो रहा है, 5% से निल हो रहा है, और यूके 2.5 और 4% से निल हो रहा है, लाइक दिस. सो ड्यूटी फ्री होने पर आपके प्रोडक्ट्स सब, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आपको क्या बेनिफिट होगा? These are the broad benefits. Detail would be shared by the other panelists, key panelists. So open market access in the export market, आपको UAE में free access मिल रहा है, open मिल रहा है, wide access मिल रहा है. आपका export competitiveness बढ़ रहा है क्योंकि वहाँ के importers को 5% duty नहीं देनी है. और आपकी पोजीशन जो है आपके कॉम्पिटिटर कंट्री से, अदर कंट्री से क्या हो रही है, एडवांटेजेस हो रही है. सो दिस इज हाउ लाइक वी आर ट्राइंग टू मूव. एंड रीजन ऑफ कीपिंग टुडेज वेबिनार इज हाउ आवर एक्सपोर्टर्स कैन टेक बेनिफिट ऑफ सच ड्यूटी फ्री एनवायरमेंट विच आर हैपनिंग these days, and accordingly they will be able to increase their exports, and finally we would be able to achieve our set targets of 42 billion or 52 billion or 100 billion. So this is only one of the ways. Now coming to the next is the what are the submissions. So Mrinali, can you please go to the next slide?
I cannot do Rashmi ji because
Okay, sorry. So now if you're coming to this 15 countries, like 15 countries. So what we have done is like $52 billion out of $52 billion, what we have seen, these are the 15 countries. If you see 1 to 15 countries where there is a huge export potential, and our targets for these countries are very good. I mean to say high. Suppose in case of USA, we are having $16 billion target, UAE $12 billion target. And if you see whatever the running trade agreements are going on, UAE, UK, Australia and Canada. So ये 4 countries में, UAE में हमारा ऑलरेडी क्या हो चुका है, साइन हो चुका है. यूके, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, कनाडा में नेगोशिएशन स्टार्ट हो चुके हैं. जीजेपीसी ने टैरिफ लाइन वाइज जो हम लोग सबमिट करते हैं, वो कैसे सबमिट किया जाता है कि जो 130 लाइंस हैं हमारे टैरिफ्स की, ऑलमोस्ट 120 और 130, हमें गवर्नमेंट हर लाइन पर पूछती है कि आप इसके ऊपर क्या आपका विश लिस्ट है दूसरे कंट्री से. सो हम लोग उनको बताते हैं पूरा एनालिसिस करके कि हमें इस लाइन के ऊपर, 8 डिजिट लाइन के ऊपर हमें ये टैरिफ्स चाहिए. सपोज 71023910, दैट इज दी पॉलिश डायमंड्स, इसके ऊपर हमको 5% से 0% चाहिए. और 71131910 पे हमें 5% है अगर यूएई में तो 0 चाहिए. सो just like this is the India wish list that we prepare for the government for all these 120 lines, and we submit to the government. So accordingly negotiations are happening, and we are very happy to share that here I have just mentioned few lines, only few lines. 120 lines मैंने नहीं यहाँ पर mention किए हैं, only few lines. Main is the gold jewelry and silver jewelry. Now if you see what we have demanded, this agreement has already been signed last month. And if you see tariff rates, if you see on this right hand side, tariff rates which are presently applicable in UAE are 5%. So what we have submitted to the government कि आप इनके ऊपर UAE से, what was our wish list is कि 5% से UAE हमारा ड्यूटी क्या कर दे, 0 कर दे, nil कर दे. So accordingly, tariff line wise, we do not have the complete document, that is under ratification, and will come in the next month. But I'm just sharing, this is going to be free almost. And in consideration, what we have demanded from the government, कि ठीक है, because we have also to give certain benefit to the UAE. So अगर हमें UAE में benefit मिल रहा है कि हम अगर gold jewelry exports करेंगे UAE में, so वहाँ के tariffs हमारे लिए 0 हो जाएंगे. Similarly, हमने उनको क्या consideration में दिया है कि 200 tons gold तक, 200 tons gold तक हमें preferential duty, import duty हमें UAE को offer करनी है. So this is coming around nearly 6%. So this is what about the gold jewelry. Similarly, silver jewelry पर भी हमने ऐसा ही offer उनको wish list किया है कि silver jewelry पर UAE में 5% duty nil हो जाए और हमारे यहाँ पर silver bar with certain quota preferential duty पर हम लोग उसको import कर पाएं. So this is how once like इसका जैसे ही applicable it is going to be executed, and जैसे ही ये prevalent होता है agreement, all the exporters can take such kind of benefit in UAE market. So this has already been signed. Now coming to this another Australia. So in case of Australia also, like if you see this shaded part, gold jewelry, silver jewelry, and imitation jewelry, where if you can see India's percentage share is 14%, 6.5%, and 1.7%. All these are our competitor markets. And if you see the highlighted portion, 5%, 5%, and 5%, say we have studied all the 120 lines with Australia also. I am just mentioning again few lines because it is not possible to show the entire Excel sheet. So whatever 5% duty rates are applicable in Australia for gold jewelry, silver jewelry, and imitation jewelry. If you see CPD, precious and semi-precious stones are already nil. So there is no such benefit that we are going to derive for these products, but definitely the gold jewelry exporters, silver jewelry exporters, and imitation jewelry exporters, because we have asked for the duty rate, free duty in Australia. So this will come down from 5% to nil in Australia, and in this way, our jewelry exporters can take the advantage of exporting their jewelry products in Australia without having any duty charge on the importers over there. So similarly, I'm just moving fast. So in case of UK also, current, if you see CPD, again in case of CPD, precious, semi-precious stones, nil duties are already there. But in case of jewelry products, 2 to 4% duties are there. So we have demanded for the, again, this should come to 0 or nil, like 4% to nil. So if such like agreement gets signed, so our exporters can export all such jewelry products duty free to all these countries. And similarly, in case of the Canada, in case of Canada also, if you see CPD, precious, rubies, all are duty free already in this market also in Canada. But gold jewelry, silver jewelry, imitation jewelry, the current rates are 5 to 8.5%. So we have demanded for again nil duty in Canada also. So in this way, this is just the submission for just a minute. Four agreements. I think so. The whole crux of sharing this document to all the members is to apprise you all, like what is happening on the ground, what kind of submission have been submitted, what we have already achieved in case of UAE, and what we are expected to achieve in case of jewelry products in UK, India, and Australia. Most probably our recommendations have been accepted in case of UAE, and most probably in Australia also it is going to be free. So this is just to apprise all the members and to kind of request, like if you can explore such opportunities, it will definitely help you out in increasing your jewelry products exports in these countries. So it is just to take the benefit or advantage of ongoing trade negotiations or trade agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi.
Yes, sir.
मैं अब जो हमारे आज एक्सपर्ट्स निशांत जी और संजय जी हैं, उनसे आग्रह करूंगा कि निशांत जी अब आप इस वेबिनार्स को आगे बढ़ाएं जिसके मेंबर्स हमारे जुड़े हुए हैं, और मेंबर्स से मैं आग्रह करूंगा कि आप अपने प्रश्नों को Q&A में रखिएगा। प्रोग्राम के अंत में हम आपके सारे प्रश्नों का उत्तर देंगे। थैंक यू सो मच। निशांत जी अभी हैंड ओवर करते हैं हम आपको आगे का सब कार्यक्रम।
Thank you, Mithilesh ji. Good evening. First of all, let me thank GJPC for giving us this opportunity to present on FTAs. Like Rashmi ma'am just mentioned, that FTAs is the hot topic of the season right now. We are seeing a lot of FTAs being signed or on the envelope being signed and being negotiated. Rashmi ji ने बहुत बढ़िया बताया कि किस तरह से what are the demands that our industry has put across. Sorry, this you need to change that vision. Only that one slide can be seen. Just a second, I'm just yeah. Is the slide visible now? And am I also audible clearly?
Yes, Nishan.
Okay, great. So Rashmi ji ने बताया कि it's gone. किस तरह से मल्टीपल FTA साइन हो रहे हैं और एक बहुत बढ़िया बात बताई that the current Commerce Ministry is quite aggressive and is looking at closing a number of these agreements so that the trade from India with all of our these, we call it as partner countries, increases. It is not that FTAs have never been signed earlier. FTAs have been signed earlier also, but maybe the benefit that our industry or the kind of role that our industry has been able to enjoy, or the benefit that our industry has been able to avail, has been limited. However, in these new FTAs which are getting signed, there are a few aspects which clearly become really beneficial for this industry. And therefore, in today's presentation, what we intend to cover is, one, what do these FTAs offer? And is our industry members, are our industry members effectively availing those benefits? और अगर हम नहीं कर रहे हैं तो हमें क्या करना चाहिए जिससे कि हम ये बेनिफिट को ऑप्टिमली यूटिलाइज कर पाए। दूसरी बात ये है कि अगर आपको एक हाथ से बेनिफिट मिल रहा है तो गवर्नमेंट ये भी चाहती है कि यू आर मेंटेनिंग प्रॉपर रिकॉर्ड्स, डॉक्यूमेंट्स एक्सेट्रा एंड फॉलोइंग द नेसेसरी प्रोविजंस। जो इसमें हमने एक देखा कि जो रश्मि जी ने बताया, वी आर आस्किंग फॉर lesser duty of our goods when they go from India to Australia or to Canada or to UAE or to UK. We are asking for a lesser duty being charged on our products when they enter into that jurisdiction. पर उसके साथ साथ there are other conditions also. For example, value addition, कि हमने यहाँ पे enough value addition create किया है कि नहीं किया है, तो ही ये benefit मिलेगा। इस aspect के लिए there are a few pointers which we'll be discussing in the presentation, but important हो जाता है कि हमारे members है, they are maintaining necessary records so that if the authorities were to ask or somebody was to question, they're able to prove that. What are those to be maintained is the other aspect that we'll touch upon. And lastly, there are few other things and there are few other nuances that this industry is facing. Of course, one is the reduction of duty, like Rashmi ji mentioned that we are asking for this. Is there something more that as an industry or as GJPC we should ask from the ask to be covered under the FTA? We will just touch upon those. Let me once again thank GJPC, Mithilesh ji, Mrinali ma'am, ED sir, and the entire fraternity of GJPC for giving us this opportunity. Like Mithilesh ji mentioned that we have been engaged with this industry for many years now. We understand the pain points and the concerns of this industry. And certain part of this presentation at the end, I've tried to touch upon those concerns. Is there an avenue to address some of those concerns through these FTAs? But as we start on this, it is important we understand what are FTAs, RTAs, CEPAs. These are different names of similar kind of trade agreements. And I will request my partner Sanjay Notani, who is an expert on trade remedial measures, which within that covers FTAs, RTAs, and various trade agreements, to first give us an overall concept on what are FTAs. Because if we understand the concept better, अगर concept का ठीक से पता चल गया, तो उसका क्या बेनिफिट उसकी होती है और किस तरह से हमें अवेल करना चाहिए, वो समझना और भी बेहतरीन हो जाएगा. So I'll just request Sanjay to take us through on the concepts of FTAs, RTAs, trade agreements.
Good evening, members. My name is Sanjay Notani. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. What I will try and do today is broadly explain you the different kinds of FTAs, because that will help us to understand exactly that what are the kinds of benefits, what are the kinds of things are we looking at from FTA to FTA, because it's not like one size fits all. And this is the way we will, talk about it. Now, very quickly coming to types of FTAs, I'll not be very technical, but let me give you an overview about it. When we first talk about FTAs, the first principal thing which comes is from a WTO perspective, which are two principles. One principle is national treatment and the other principle is MFN. National treatment means whatever are the imported goods coming into the country, whether you export to UAE or UAE exports to India, we will treat all the products equally, including all the laws and provisions. The second is, very quickly, MFN, most favored nation. Now, this principle is under the WTO. That means, irrespective of the country, irrespective of the source, I will give them all the benefits. Now, ये सारी जो treaties हैं हमने sign की थी 1994 में, जब WTO came into force. However, now when we talk about FTAs, it is against the principle. It is an exception to the principle of MFN. Now, what are we doing is that we are not going to treat everybody equally, but we are going to give mutual benefits between countries. And that is an exception which has been given under the GATT. Now, come to the type of trade agreements. In this, first is a framework agreement, which is an FTA. Like in India, ASEAN had signed a framework agreement that this is the way future we are going to sort of set it up. When we come to PTA, which is basically plurilateral trade agreement, which means 2 or more partners will give preferential right only to certain products, not all the tariff lines. So under the India, Afghanistan, India, Chile, we have agreed on certain products. Now we come to SEPA. When we say SEPA or CESA, this is broader. This means it's not only goods, it's goods, services, investments, intellectual property rights, including professionals. So, you know, India, Singapore, India, Korea, India, UAE, India, Japan, these are the kinds of agreements where we have decided that goods is not only limited to goods, but we will also go into the larger basket of things. And today, you know, from an economy perspective, that goods is important, and equally services also giving foreign exchange to country. So we have also allowed to rationalize those things. And last and not the least is customs union. Now we know European Union is an example of a customs union, sets of 27 countries which have come together amongst themselves. There is a zero duty. So ultimately, when tomorrow we will sign an FTA with a country like EU, we will be signing an agreement with the customs union as a whole. So these are the types of trade agreements which we are talking about. Coming next to constituents of a SEPA, that what exactly are the things when we talk about it. Now, under this, goods, of course, is one is the concession on goods. And when I say concession on goods, there are 2 kinds of concessions which we are talking about. One is on the tariff and one is on the non-tariff. Tariff clearly means only duty cuts. But ultimately, we also know that in trade, duty cut is not the only thing we are talking about. There are other nuances of things in terms of standards, in terms of procedures, in terms of labeling. All those kinds of things will be discussed under SEPA. Services, today, as we can see, there are professional services like engineering, accountancy, legal services. But let me be very honest, there are one other things which we should also understand, that most of these services also come in the larger bracket of e-commerce. Today, we know in the COVID, e-commerce chapter of the electronic commerce has also become very, very important. You know, India is already developing its own rules and regulations on e-commerce, but ultimately with trading countries sitting here in India, if you are doing a trade with the other country, it's not only necessary, it will be actual physical exports. It could be through an e-commerce model and the taxation of it, which of course Nishant will be dwelling some of those nuances. Investments. Ultimately, the meaning of SEPA is not only in goods and services, it is also investments. That means we are opening to broader sectors in terms of investments in infrastructure, investments in ports, whatever those investments are, and what are the rules going to be around it. Last and not the least is trade facilitation. In the trade facilitation, what we are going to be talking about, information exchange, transparency, procedure fairness. Like today between India and UAE, when we will sign, what kinds of documentation, what kinds of things are we able to agree upon, so that ultimately trade can move faster and each of the countries will not sort of be a stumbling block in terms of processes. So these are the constituents very quickly. Coming, I don't need to explain all this. These are already a list of all the countries which we are going, but interestingly, ongoing, while UAE is an early harvest, means we have already agreed on a certain product. We've already agreed the tariff line. When we will go into an actual discussion with UAE, which is opening the all tariff lines, that is the time you also got to be ready that which are the other tariff lines which UAE may come back to tell India that I want concession on these chapters. India will go back to them saying, I want concession on chapters such as textiles, chapters such as pharma, chapters such as, goods of metals. So those are the concessions which we will be discussing on an, fully blown basis. Now, in terms of the current agreements, we know UAE was signed in 88 days. Australia is already, we are planning to finish Australia by the end of this month or early next month. Canada has already visited us. We are going to be visiting them. UK, our India team is already in UK negotiating early. And what I heard last week from the government that GCC also is very quickly going to be signing with us. So what happens now? Once you start talking with UAE, automatically GCC becomes that whole market for us, which is like a customs union for India. Therefore, we will have to be ready, fully ready to, try and see not only UAE, but which are the other markets in GCC that we should be talking about. So this is just to give you very, very plainly an overview about all of those things.
Next, what we will intend to discuss is, so Sanjay ने जो भी बताया, that is कौन से agreement है, ये agreement कैसे presence में आते हैं, agreement का constitution क्या होता है. Important ये है कि अगर agreement sign हो गया, उसके बाद अगर industry members को इन agreement का benefit लेना है, तो benefit के लिए थोड़े कायदे भी है. वो कायदे क्या है वो समझना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. तो हम दो चीज समझेंगे, एक बार के उसमें फायदे क्या है, व्हाट आर द बेनिफिट्स अवेलेबल अंडर द एग्रीमेंट एंड व्हाट आर द कंडीशन सब्जेक्ट टू व्हिच दिस बेनिफिट्स आर अवेलेबल. बिकॉज दिस अग्रीमेंट इज अ लॉन्ग ड्रॉन अग्रीमेंट एंड द अग्रीमेंट इज एप्लीकेबल टू द एंटायर ट्रेड एंड कॉमर्स. ये खाली अपनी जेम्स एंड ज्वेलरी इंडस्ट्री के लिए नहीं है, वो सेम अग्रीमेंट सारे ही इंडस्ट्रीज के लिए है. एंड देयरफॉर हाउ आर दीज रिक्वायर्ड टू बी रेड for our industry becomes more important. So let's touch upon some of the important aspects of these agreements. The first one is concessions. जैसे रश्मि मैम ने भी बताया that one of the biggest benefit of an FTA being signed is tariff concessions. Tariff concession in the sense जो customs duty लगती है, border protection tax लगता है, वो अगर वहां से goods, example ले लीजिए UAE इंडिया का, अगर यूएई से गुड्स आ रहे हैं इंडिया में तो इंडियन इंपोर्टर को कस्टम ड्यूटी कम लगेगी. फॉर एग्जांपल गोल्ड पे जैसे बताया गया कि फर्स्ट 200 टन्स ऑफ गोल्ड व्हेन इंपोर्टेड इनटू इंडिया विल बी एट अ कस्टम 1% लेसर कस्टम ड्यूटी देन द नॉर्मल रेट एप्लीकेबल. सेम वे व्हेन इंडियन ज्वेलरी इज एक्सपोर्टेड टू यूएई, if UAE normally charges 5%, here it will be a nil rate or whatever is the concessional rate. How does that benefit? It benefits because your jewelry now is available in the UAE market that much competitively, that much cheaper, and therefore the possibility of a demand for Indian jewelry being supplied that increases. Now when I said this, मैंने ये बताया कि Indian jewelry की demand बढ़ेगी. तो ये Indian jewelry क्या होती है? Indian jewelry वो होती है जो इंडिया में बनी है और इंडिया का वैल्यू एडिशन है, वो हम अगली साइड में देखेंगे, बट ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है. Second is tariff concessions can often be agreed in a phased manner. For example, अपनी जो इंडिया जापान का अग्रीमेंट हुआ था उसमें ज्वेलरी के लिए ऐसा बताया गया था कि 2.8% से लेके 2.16% की रेंज में रहेगा और हर 11 साल में 11 इंस्टॉलमेंट में उसको जीरो पे ला देंगे. आज इंडिया की ज्वेलरी जो जापान जाती है वो जीरो रेट पे है, पर वहां पे वैल्यू एडिशन नॉर्म्स है. ज्वेलरी प्रोडक्ट्स जनरली किस तरह से वो मोस्ट सेपा में होते ही है, मोस्ट एफटीए में ज्वेलरी प्रोडक्ट्स होते हैं. हमने रश्मि मैम ने भी बताया, उसमें हमने देखा कि डायमंड्स, कलर्ड जेमस्टोन्स एक्सेट्रा को नील रेट है बिकॉज वो कंट्री में ही नील रेट होता है, बट ज्वेलरी पे जो रेट लगता है उसका कंसेशनल रेट हमें मिल सकता है. एक लास्ट पार्ट है जो संजय जी ने भी बहुत इफेक्टिवली बताया, दैट what we are now signing are SEPA. This is a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. और जब हम कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव कहते हैं, हम ये कहना चाहते हैं कि इससे दोनों देशों के जो बिजनेस हो रहा है, कॉमर्स हो रहा है, उसमें और भी फैसिलिटेशन क्या ऐड कर सकते हैं वो भी देखना चाहिए. तो इसके लिए देयर आर सर्टेन कॉन्सेप्ट्स कॉल्ड म्यूचुअल रिकॉग्निशन एग्रीमेंट के आज मैं इंडिया में किसी तरीके से इतना उसका बेनिफिट लेता हूं, तो अगर वो इंडिया रिकॉग्नाइज करता है कि ये सर्टिफिकेशन मिला है, फॉर एग्जांपल हॉलमार्किंग, इंडिया आज कहता है कि हमारी ज्वेलरी यहाँ पे हॉलमार्क है, तो उसी ज्वेलरी जब वापस दुबई में जाती है और दुबई में भी अगर वहां का लोकल हॉलमार्किंग है, तो कैन द इंडियन हॉलमार्किंग अथॉरिटी एंड द दुबई हॉलमार्किंग अथॉरिटी अग्री that Indian hallmark jewelry will be considered as equivalent to Dubai hallmark jewelry and therefore can be sold without undergoing a second process. ये बहुत ही important point है. हम जिस तरह से अभी लॉबी हम जैसे मांग रहे हैं कि एटलीस्ट हमको ड्यूटी रेट्स कम कर दे, वो तो एक है ही, पर क्या हम ऐसी चीजें भी मांग सकते हैं मैंने इस प्रेजेंटेशन के अंत में 2-3 ऐसे इश्यूज भी आइडेंटिफाई करे हुए हैं और हम उसके ऊपर डिस्कस करेंगे। ये जो मैं आपको बता रहा था, जो ड्यूटी रेट रिडक्शन है, अभी जो भी हमारे सेपा साइन हुए जापान के साथ, जो मैं बता रहा था 2.08 उसका 2.16 किया गया है। और उसी तरह से अगर इंपोर्टेड गुड्स कुछ आता है इंडिया जापान में, हम वापस इंडिया में लेते हैं तो उसको किस तरह से रेट को इंपोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट के लिए, पर ये सारे पुराने एफटीएज है और ये इतने हम यूज में नहीं ले रहे। जो नए एफटीएज है उसमें ज्यादा इफेक्टिव प्रोविजंस डाले गए हैं, जिसके ऊपर हम टच अपॉन करेंगे। जो दूसरा पॉइंट है एफटीए के नीचे आता है, दैट इज रूल्स ऑफ ओरिजिन। ये भी एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण पॉइंट है, क्योंकि आपके उन्हीं प्रोडक्ट्स को बेनिफिट मिलेगा। सपोज एक अग्रीमेंट है यूएई और इंडिया के बीच में, तो यूएई इंडिया के प्रोडक्ट्स को ही बेनिफिट देगा। अगर थाईलैंड के प्रोडक्ट इंडिया में लाके इंडिया से बेचे जा रहे हैं तो यूएई नहीं देगा, क्योंकि वो थाईलैंड का इनडायरेक्ट रूट ले रहे हैं। या तो कोई और देश के प्रोडक्ट अगर यूएई से आके इंडिया में आ रहे हैं तो उसको नहीं मिलेगा, क्योंकि यूएई के, तो वो यूएई का प्रोडक्ट है या तो इंडिया का प्रोडक्ट है। उसके लिए what they have provided is rules of origin are used to attribute a country of origin, that these goods are the country of origin for those goods are India. For example, Indian jewelry, the gold is not Indian, but the gold is converted into jewelry and the final jewelry is Indian. Therefore, it is the rules of origin to products for the purpose of determining the benefit under FTA. Only those products will enjoy the benefit. How are these rules determined? These rules are normally determined based on value addition. That gold इंडिया में आके इंडिया में कितना वैल्यू एडिशन होता है, और हर एक अग्रीमेंट में एक सर्टेन परसेंटेज होता है कि अगर इस परसेंटेज के ऊपर वैल्यू एडिशन है तो उसको इंडियन गुड्स माना जाएगा और उसको बेनिफिट मिलेगा। इस मामले में पहले इंडिया में इंडिया थाईलैंड, इंडिया जापान के अग्रीमेंट्स हुए, इंडिया कोरिया के हुए हैं, जिसमें काफी कंसर्न हो गया है क्योंकि वहां से ट्रेडेड गुड्स आ रहे थे और इंडिया में बेनिफिट ले रहे थे। These are the normal norms which are given in the earlier FTAs. जो FTA में रूल ऑफ ओरिजिन यानी इंडियन गुड्स है या तो थाई गुड्स है अगर इंडिया में आ रहे हैं तो कैसे कैलकुलेट किया जाता है? कैलकुलेशन ये होता है, ये जो ऊपर का एक टेबल है हमने VA नॉर्म्स लिखे हुए, वैल्यू एडिशन नॉर्म्स, के इंडिया जापान अग्रीमेंट था उसमें मिनिमम 35% वैल्यू एडिशन चाहिए था। ऐसे इंडिया थाईलैंड अग्रीमेंट था उसमें 20% चाहिए था, इंडिया सिंगापुर में 40% चाहिए। ये कैलकुलेट कैसे किया जाता है? कैलकुलेट इस तरह से किया जाता है कि ओरिजिनल मटेरियल, ये जो फॉर्मूला दिया हुआ है, ओरिजिनेटिंग मटेरियल कॉस्ट प्लस डायरेक्ट लेबर प्लस डायरेक्ट ओवरहेड कॉस्ट प्लस अदर कॉस्ट प्लस प्रॉफिट, जो इंडिया का सेलिंग प्राइस है, ये सारे कंपोनेंट्स अगर इंडियन है और वो कंपोनेंट का टोटल वैल्यू 35% से ज्यादा है तो फिर उसको इंडियन गुड्स गिना जाएगा और वो ये एफटीए के बेनिफिट में आ जाएगा। और भी एक फॉर्मूला दी गई है, पर अब इसको देखा जाए तो ज्वेलरी या तो अपनी इंडस्ट्री में ये लेवल का वैल्यू एडिशन आइडेंटिफाई करना थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट हो जाएगा, 35% 40%। इसलिए जो अपने फॉरेन ट्रेड पॉलिसी में अभी जब हम एडवांस ऑथराइजेशन लेते हैं तो वैल्यू एडिशन नॉर्म्स दिए गए हैं कि फॉर एग्जांपल फॉर गोल्ड ज्वेलरी इट इज 3.5% और फॉर स्टडेड ज्वेलरी इट इज 6% और फॉर डायमंड स्टडेड इट इज 7%। के इतना वैल्यू एडिशन बता दिया तो आप एडवांस ऑथराइजेशन का इनपुट आउटपुट नॉर्म्स के अकॉर्डिंग बेनिफिट ले सकते हो। हमारी अटेम्प्ट है, इंडिया की अटेम्प्ट है कि जो इंडिया यूएई अग्रीमेंट है उसमें सिमिलर नॉर्म्स ही लिए गए जो आज फॉरेन ट्रेड पॉलिसी में एलिजिबल है। इसीलिए जो थोड़ी सी जो भी खबर अवेलेबल है इंडिया यूएई एफटीए के बारे में, वहां पे इट हैज बीन मेंशन्ड दैट लो वैल्यू एडिशन नॉर्म्स may be prescribed for gold and other high value items. This is a very important point that only if these low value addition norms are made available, then they will become eligible under the FTA. More importantly, for the industry participants, अगर उसमें 3.5% प्रिस्क्राइब किया गया है, 6% है, 7% है, 10% है, आपके पास नेसेसरी डॉक्यूमेंट्स होने चाहिए ये प्रूफ करने के लिए कि आपका वैल्यू एडिशन ये नॉर्म्स वो मीट कर रहा है। ये क्यों इंपॉर्टेंट है? ये इसलिए इंपॉर्टेंट है कि आप जब यहाँ से ज्वेलरी भेजोगे तो आपको एक सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन वो ज्वेलरी के साथ भेजना है। इफ यू आर सेंडिंग टू यूएई और इन फ्यूचर यू आर सप्लाइंग टू यूके, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, कनाडा एक्सेट्रा, यहाँ पे ये प्रोसीजर दी गई है कि ये सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन किस तरह से इसको प्रोक्योर किया जाता है। इट इज इश्यूड बाय द डेजिग्नेटेड इशूइंग अथॉरिटी। Typically in India, it is the FIO or depending on the industry involved, it will be the relevant authority that will issue the certificate of origin. What is important is that ये तो हमारे एक्सपोर्ट के लिए हो गया। जब हम इंपोर्ट कर रहे हैं तो जो आपको जो सप्लाई कर रहा है उनको सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन ऑब्टेन करना पड़ेगा। वो अपने कंट्री के रिलेवेंट अथॉरिटी से सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन ऑब्टेन करेंगे और आपको जब ये गुड्स बेचते हैं गुड्स के साथ वो सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन भी भेजेंगे। अगर आपके पास वो सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन नहीं है सप्लायर के पास से तो आपको इसके इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी रिडक्शन में बेनिफिट नहीं मिलेगा। इसमें एक बहुत relevant important change that the government has recently introduced is normally in case of such a certificate of origin, if the government doubts the authenticity of the certificate of origin, यानी अगर गवर्नमेंट को शक है कि ये सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ ओरिजिन सही नहीं है तो ये गवर्नमेंट की जिम्मेदारी होती है कि वो दूसरी गवर्नमेंट से बातें करे और उसकी whether it is authentic or not उसका मालूमात निकाले। परंतु इंडिया ने अभी recently they have introduced a provision by which the entire onus has been shifted to the Indian importer. So if we are importing gold and that is imported at a lower rate of duty under the India-UAE treaty, I'm just giving an example, you will need to have a certificate of origin which accompanies with the gold. More importantly, that certificate of origin has been appropriately obtained. That also you need to have underlying documents because there are those Carota rules which have been brought in. As per those Carota rules, you need to maintain that. So it is very important that while benefits are being made available, industry members are aware what is the procedure they need to follow, what documents they need to maintain, and how they need to account for all of these, so that later on they don't get into a dispute or an argument with the Indian authorities so far as these benefits are concerned. There are two more other points which I'll request Sanjay to take us through. These are really critical aspects of the FTAs.
As lawyers, of course, dispute settlement is very important. So between countries, we also should have a mechanism in case, like how Nishant explained, some of these rules which we agree, there could be a situation where actually countries are not what they had agreed and what intended actually to happen may not happen so. So in these agreements, we also have a dispute settlement where actually both these countries can sit down together through an arbitration mode and settle these disputes. Of course, the mechanisms are given, but I would not labor too much upon it because India has been not that aggressive in taking these disputes, and we'll then accordingly, not go too much about it. But yes, there are ways and means to solve these issues. Coming next, now let me be very honest with you. If you see, अगर new age issues को आप देखेंगे कि हमारे new FTAs में क्या-क्या issues जो foreign governments है वो कौन से issues के ऊपर हमारे से commitments मांग रहे हैं. Now these are commitments of such types that in the past we have never seen. Now these are commitments on child labor, wages, labor standards, environmental standards, ESG standards. Now why this is important? See, tariffs and non-tariffs के ऊपर तो झगड़े चलते रहेंगे और वो खत्म होंगे. But the trade wars which have happened between US and China, US and Russia. Now these are certain new ways which the Western governments or some of the governments are planning, that this is the way we will use ways and means, not only to agree upon a minimum platform between two countries, but also in case if one of the countries does not satisfy any of these conditions, then the other foreign country has the right to actually stop imports into the country, even if the concessions have been given. So these are certain new prominent features, certain new critical features, which I would leave it on the table. I know, of course, JGPC being one of very, very important sectors and associations must already be working on most of this, and even Government of India is coming out with new labor codes. But I would also justify and to say this, that ultimately at an industry level, at a sector level, and at a company level, it is important that we start adopting this, start being transparent about these issues, because ultimately it's a first mover advantage. That means tomorrow between you and Vietnam, suppose if Vietnam is also there, and if Vietnam is not able to commit this, but India or India associations such as JJPC is able to bring these internal standards within this sector, then you will get that first mover advantage of exporting to developed countries such as Europe, US, Canada, and this is where some of these things are being discussed, which I would leave it on the table, and that may be taken at some other time.
So like Sanjay mentioned, and I think very important point, that child labor, minimum wages, standard of living are certain clauses getting inserted into FTAs. Apni industry with the efforts of GJPC and other things, like Sanjay mentioned, that we are coping up with these things and implementing. But very important point for our industry members to note. This slide is where I have tried to highlight some of the pain points that India is currently facing. And is there a possibility that we could use the FTA mode to resolve our concerns that this industry is facing locally in the day-to-day businesses that they are doing? So, इसमें मैंने क्या-क्या discuss किया हुआ है? पहला वाला ये है that first one is just the tariff rate reduction. In case of exports, obviously that facilitation will be available, जो हमने already discuss किया हुआ है. दूसरा वाला है value addition norms. जैसे मैंने आपको पहले बताया that जो पहले वाले agreement थे उसमें value addition norms 35%, 40% मांगा गया था, which is very high for this industry. It is therefore important that when the concerned question of products of this industry are concerned, appropriate value addition norms, preferably those prescribed in the foreign trade policy, should be prescribed under the free trade agreement and adopted. The other aspects which are there is, for example, today, as we speak, there is this issue of valuation of diamonds, cut and polished diamonds or rough diamonds. Almost, while it should have been done on sample basis, almost every parcel is being examined and valuation issues are being raised. Now, suppose if there is a parcel coming from UAE to India, क्या हम इस तरह का एक अंडरस्टैंडिंग FTA के नीचे बना सकते हैं कि अगर UAE में कोई वैल्यूएशन अथॉरिटी है और या तो इंडिया में वैल्यूएशन अथॉरिटी है, तो UAE से जब पार्सल इंडिया आ रहा है और वैल्यूएशन अथॉरिटी ने UAE में वैल्यूएशन किया हुआ है और एक सर्टिफिकेट दिया हुआ है, तो इंडियन अथॉरिटी विल एक्सेप्ट दैट because that is also a recognized authority and they are partners to Indian trade. And Indian authority will thereafter not go into further questioning and examination. It can be vice versa, that Indian jewelry is being supplied from India to UAE. Indian jewelry is being valued by an Indian authority. That certificate issued by the Indian authority will not be questioned in UAE. अगर ये facilitation बनाया जाए तो आज जो हम काफी समस्या फेस कर रहे हैं, जहाँ पे सारे कट एंड पॉलिश डायमंड्स है या तो और भी पार्सल्स है आके चेक हो रहे हैं और वैल्यूएशन हो रहा है, can we come to some sort of such a solution? It will save a lot of time of the industry, it will save a lot of concerns of the industry, and it will facilitate. Is this possible? The answer is yes, and that is why we are calling it is a SEPA. It's a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, जिसमें mutual recognition agreement भी होते हैं कि हमारा आपका वैल्यूएशन सर्टिफिकेट है, हम म्यूचुअली उसको रिकॉग्नाइज करेंगे. तो दुबई का सर्टिफिकेट है वो इंडिया रिकॉग्नाइज करेगी, इंडिया का सर्टिफिकेट है वो दुबई रिकॉग्नाइज करेगी. इसी तरह से एक दूसरा इशू है, say for example, today when we talk about gold especially imported by nominated agencies, it is typically the LBMA approved standard of gold. Now Dubai also has a Dubai gold good delivery standards. Can Dubai good delivery standards also become an important norm? If that is so, what will happen is that the total quantum of gold which can be made available through nominated agencies, that will also increase, because now you don't just have LBMA approved, but you also have the Dubai good delivery standards gold available, which may just improve the supply and the flexibility of making available the gold in the country. So these are certain mutual recognition agreement, mutual recognition aspects, which not specifically for the industry members, but industry association like GJPC could identify certain concerns. It would require some effort to identify certain concerns, prepare a paper on that and put it to the government such that these benefits can be identified. This is, in fact, I will request Sanjay to take us through, because Sanjay has actually been working for various other industry associations in similar manner, identifying issues, putting to the government and facilitating that these are incorporated in the free trade agreements to facilitate the trade and commerce of that industry. इस तरह से जो हम भी face कर रहे हैं. So Sanjay, can you take us through some of those aspects and how is this carried out?
So one of the industries which is I can talk about because it's in the public domain is pharma. Now, as we understand in pharma, there is a lot of issues on IPR, correct? And also there is a lot of certifications involved because ultimately FDA, FFA, all these kinds of agencies are involved when you export something, and when you import into the country will have all these kinds of standards. Now, as far as India, UAE, India, Australia kinds of agreements are concerned, what we have asked as part of the pharma industry is that if I've already got a certification from a country like USA, UK, Japan, then UAE and Australia will not ask me to do again those kinds of certifications of IPR issues, which tomorrow not only slows my business, but ultimately going forward, it may disrupt my business, because these are the kinds of things, nine formulations, nine things, whatever things get introduced in the market, this will help me as a facilitation. So MRA basically works sector to sector. If there are certain issues in terms of processes, procedures, and some of these standards and inspections, we can ease out for the goodness of this particular sector, and then agree with the partner country and take it forward. Very quickly, I just wanted to pick up this particular issue, that before we sign an FTA, as governments, कौन सी चीजें होती हैं जो हम अपने माइंड में रखना चाहिए, because ultimately when government sits down, government has some of these prescriptive models to decide, okay, yes, we should have an agreement with UAE or with Canada. What are the kinds of things? Now, I understand, of course, GDP and employment is a given thing. वो तो understood है कि उतना तो वो तो जरूरी है. लेकिन there are certain models we run, like a gravity model or a partial equilibrium model, that ultimately, if these are the sectors which are going to be involved, what is the kind of list as a concession the partner country is asking, and against that, what is the kind of list we will ask for? Because ultimately, there has to be a trade balance, trade increase, but it shouldn't be a trade deficit. So we run these models in terms of economic sort of situations to see whether it serves the purpose of the country. Of course, the next is the state-wise value addition norms. Geopolitical issues also very important, because today, there are mini trade deals which also happen. USA has done some mini trade deals, like we were involved in this whole issue of Alfonso versus Davidson buy. Now, those are special status kind of measures which we can take geopolitically, because that's a special status which can be given. Coming to this, one is definitely what are the kinds of things, but today as an industry and as a sector, which is JJEPC, question is, what are the learnings can we get from other trade agreements? See, today there are agreements as RCEP, there are agreements as CPP, which are very, very large trade agreements. Are there certain nuances? Are there certain prescriptions for sectors that we can pick it up? Very important for us to learn. Evolving global supply chains. Now हम देख सकते हैं कि last 2-3 weeks में ये जो रशिया और यूक्रेन की वजह से sanctions आए हैं, सारे global channels change हो रहे हैं. So what I could do earlier with Russia, now I don't think I can do with Russia, because there are sanctions. Now, evolving global supply chain models are important, so that to see tomorrow, if you want to export to, say, Africa, or you want to export something to Iran. Now, if UAE already has a deal with that country, rather than setting up a business in India, can you try and set up a subsidiary or a business in UAE and ultimately take the benefit for that country? So you have two batches of agreements. One is between India and UAE, which you can try and send something. Then from UAE onward to the other country, if you do those kinds of value additions, and tomorrow if GCC becomes a reality, I can be anywhere in GCC and do businesses with any other country where UAE already has an agreement, which India may not have. So suppose tomorrow UAE may have an agreement with China. India and China may not have an agreement as much as what we would like to that full extent, but UAE will definitely have. So you have to start thinking of supply chain models. Last and not the least, bilateral safeguards and other domestic instruments. How do we protect our market? Because once, if you get a concession, you should also be able to understand that is there a way that we can stop those imports? What are those kinds of things that happen? And last and not the least, annually, both the governments usually sit with each other to try and see, are there any issues? Are there any opportunities? Are there any things that we would like to change? Those annual review meetings are very important. And as an association or a vibrant association, you should be ready to give some of these, informations to your government, so that ultimately when government discusses with the next government on an annual basis, it will help them to, better restructure or remodel some of these issues. Now, coming to this point, you know, I always look at these agreements very, very differently in terms of, first, we need to strategize exactly as an industry and as a market. What exactly? Now I understand Rashmi ma'am already showed us some of those numbers, exciting numbers. Question is now, for each and tariff line, for each of those facilitations, what are the kinds of things we need to talk about? Collect statistics. Today, what are the imports in UAE? What are the imports into GCC from other countries? And I always think Italy, I always think some of these other countries are a good competitor to our business. But tomorrow, if we want to, you know, take over those businesses or take over those countries, then, you know, I think we need to strategize a little more into this. Important is, like I told you, the econometric kind of models and some of these nuances. We need to actually periodically come out with a white paper for the government, because ultimately the government needs feedback from a 360 kind of a view. And that 360 kind of a view is important, that some of the members, some of the management sit down together, understand those issues on the ground, understand exactly the next potential negotiations and thinking on the ground, that what is there for us, and try and represent that. Last and not the least is, of course, advocacy. Government not only is involved in pre-negotiation, government is involved during the negotiation. So some of your members must have actually traveled while negotiating from the other side. Like in RCEP, I was part of the Indian government delegation to sit against with China, with other countries, to see exactly what are they saying, what are we saying, and ultimately sit down there in those talks and finish this process. It shouldn't be, you know, come back and then look at it and then we go back and finish it. Finish those issues right there along with the members, because some of the members are important. They know exactly what it happens. So these kinds of quick things happen in the meeting, and that is what it happens. Last and not the least is assist. Now, here also it's very important that one of the things which I've learned from America and the way they do business is, some of the members already have offices in some foreign jurisdictions. It's important that we also sit down there and actually educate, understand on the ground from the counterparts in those countries, network with those counterparts in those countries, with the government, with the right agencies, to sit down there and see if there is a way to break this, crack this, ultimately to ensure that both the countries benefit and ultimately the sector benefits. Now, what are those kinds and ways and means is important. So that is one of the prescriptions I would leave it for the sector to think about these issues.
I think Mithila ji ne starting mein kaha tha ke we had these slides right up front, but I got them shifted at the end, because I was just mentioning that ELP has worked with this industry for years now, and there is not much that we need to speak about ELP. We only look at, you know, where we can bring value to this industry. That is more important. I am hoping that with this presentation, we've been able to disseminate certain knowledge about FTAs. More importantly, for industry members to be agile on availing every benefit possible under these FTAs, because like Rashmi mentioned at the start of it, that the Commerce Ministry is aggressive and we are signing a number of these agreements. But along with that, also ensure that all your documentation, etc., is effective. And secondly, for the industry association, including GJPC, that are there other avenues that we can seek or other facilitations that we can seek under these agreements, which will bring about ease and convenience for our members in conducting their businesses. Thank you. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have and take it from there. Mithila ji, over to you.
हम क्वेश्चन आंसर्स पे आ जाते हैं, और समय की जो सीमा है उसको भी ध्यान में रखते हुए प्रश्न एक एक करके आपके सामने रखेंगे, और हमारा आपसे निवेदन होगा कि उसका जो भी रिलेवेंट आंसर्स वो आप दे पाए।
जरूर सर।
तो आपके सामने Q&A में आप चैट में देख लें सर कि एक क्वेश्चन है, प्लीज क्लैरिफाई ड्यूटी ऑफ 5 to 8.5% of import duty in Canada. Who and how will get the quota for concessional duty in UAE?
Please read my questions in chat. Thanks. What are the question? Any question answer में नहीं?
Yes, yeah.
चैट में है।
हाँ जी। Kindly share PPT. Sorry, Mitesh, can I read the question? यहाँ पे एक दूसरा है. Country of origin.
Clarify duty of.
Please clarify duty of 5 to 8.5% import duty in Canada. Who and how will get the quota for concessional duty in UAE? So the duty range that we mentioned is the. I'm responding to the first question. The first question is in relation to 5 to 8.5% of the import duty. So this is the range of duty on multiple products under Chapter 71, which is applicable in Canada. If India signs an FTA with Canada, then the supplies of our jewelry from India to Canada will be benefited to this extent, in the sense that depending on how the negotiations come across, either they will reduce this duty rate or bring it to zero, and therefore our products in Canada will be that much more competitive, cheaper and easily available in that country. To the
second question, who and how will the quota for concessional duty? Very important question, because ultimately I understand if there is a quota which the government has given it to us, I think it is the sector and the association will have to decide with the government. Is this quota to be distributed in the top 10? Is the quota to be distributed across different spectrums of the gold jewelry, and within that, different kinds of jewelry, as to how this quota needs to be done? Or is it like first in, first out? So, or the value addition in terms of who brings the most value and the foreign exchange, these are prescriptions which are given. Ultimately, it is the association and the sector, I would suggest, rather than the government coming and giving you its own ways and means. It's important that we should be ready with our discussion internally as to how we want to propose and give it to the government, so that the government at the DGFT level can implement this by way of bringing in a particular online licensing mode, where it allows you to bring this quota and take it from there. So there are ways and means which the association will have to discuss this with the government, and important that the sector or the JJPC gives its formula or some kind of a methodology to the government to work this out.
Also, I think just to add to what Sanjay is saying, there is this quota of gold being imported from UAE. I am assuming it would be there. It will be controlled more by UAE, and it may be on first come first serve basis, that whatever gold is coming in up to 200 tons, it will be enjoying the 1%, and any gold imported post 200 tons will be at the full rate. Country of origin be India if gold ornament made out of gold bullion imported from UAE. So I'm just explaining. The question is that gold will be imported from UAE, converted into jewelry and re-exported, maybe re-exported back to UAE. Whether we will be able to enjoy, क्योंकि पहले जब gold आया तो आपको 1% benefit मिल गया, उसको आपने jewelry में convert किया और उसी jewelry को वापस UAE बेचा तो फिर से 5%. The answer is yes, if you are meeting the value addition norms, and like what we understand from the news reports and things, the value addition norms are expected to be as set out in the FTP or nominal norms, not 35 and 40%. So if you're meeting the value addition norms, then it will be considered as Indian jewelry eligible for FTA benefit, and you'll be eligible for the FTA benefit. Give information about payment method. Payment method though is whatever is the internationally accepted method. There is no payment method related aspects that generally are prescribed under a foreign trade agreement, FTA agreement. So that will be as per the normal norms currently being carried out. Please provide the details of range of duty in Canada. We will, that is available. It is available on the net also, but that can be made available. It is on different products, different range has been provided. Who is eligible to import gold bullion from UAE for trading in India other than banks and nominated agencies? So in relation to import of gold from a FTA perspective, there is no specific norms. Whatever are the current norms for importing gold, those who are currently eligible, the eligibility continues to be the same basis. There is no special requirement or aspect that is being introduced through the FTA. Only the rate at which that gold comes in, as per the current norms applicable, will be at a concessional rate reduced by 1% if you are importing it from UAE under that, within that 200 tons in a year.
Nishanji, question है, will the country of origin be India if jewelry made in India out of the imported gold bullion from UAE?
मिथिलेश जी वो क्वेश्चन यहाँ पे भी आ गया, आई थिंक मैंने उसको रिस्पॉन्ड कर दिया है इसमें भी, जो आप Q&A से पढ़ रहे हैं ना।
ओके
हाँ, तो वो चैट में भी सेम क्वेश्चन था, मैंने उसका रिस्पॉन्ड दिया हुआ है।
तो मुझे लगता है मेंबर्स के क्वेश्चंस लगातार आ रहे हैं, लेकिन हमारे यहाँ भी समय की मर्यादा है। आपने भी अपने कॉन्टेक्ट डिटेल शेयर किए हैं। मैं मेंबर से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि आपके जो भी क्वेश्चंस हो आप हमें शेयर करें। हम अपनी ईमेल आईडी आपको शेयर करते हैं और उसमें आपके जो भी प्रश्न हो आप हम तक पहुंचाएं, जिससे कि हम उसका आंसर जो अपने एक्सपर्ट्स पैनल से यहाँ पे हैं उनसे लेकर के हम आप तक पहुंचाने का प्रयास करें। तो जो भी मेंबर्स यहाँ पे जुड़े हैं, मैंने काफी लोगों ने रिक्वेस्ट किया हुआ है प्रेजेंटेशन के लिए, और कुछ लोगों के रिक्वेस्ट है कि और सारे डिटेल्स के लिए। तो मैं आप सभी से निवेदन करूंगा कि आप अपना ईमेल आईडी जो है और अपना जो रिक्वायरमेंट्स है उसको इस ईमेल आईडी पे हमें भेजें। मैं अभी इमीडिएटली चैट में आपको ईमेल आईडी शेयर कर रहा हूँ, जिससे कि ये पूरी रिकॉर्डिंग्स और जो भी इंफॉर्मेशन आपने पूछा है वो हम शेयर कर सके। और मैं DJPC की तरफ से एक बार फिर जो मेंबर्स यहाँ पे जुड़े हुए हैं उन सबका स्वागत करते हुए और हमारे जो आज के पैनलिस्ट हैं उनका भी अभिनंदन करते हुए कि हम जल्दी ही फिर से जैसे जैसे FTA के ऊपर और भी क्लैरिटी आएगी हम इस तरह के वेबिनार्स करते रहेंगे और वेबिनार्स के माध्यम से हम आपसे जुड़ेंगे, जिससे कि आप जो है अपडेट होते रहे और जो भी बेनिफिट्स सरकार के माध्यम से FTA के माध्यम से और DJPC ने जो भारत सरकार को रिप्रेजेंट किया हुआ उसके माध्यम से जो भी बेनिफिट्स FTA में इंक्लूड की जाए उसकी इमीडिएट जानकारी आप तक पहुंचे और आप उसका बेनिफिट्स ले सकें। तो हमने आपको ईमेल आईडी शेयर किया हुआ है minali.ile@djpcindia.com। तो आप सभी से आग्रह है कि आप अपना जो भी प्रश्न है और अपनी ईमेल आईडी निश्चित तौर पे इससे शेयर करें, जिससे हम आपको डिटेल शेयर कर सकें। तो थैंक यू सो मच निशांत जी और संजय जी, जो भी मेंबर जुड़े हैं आप सब का भी धन्यवाद देते हुए आप सबको होली की शुभकामना देते हुए मैं मिथिलेश पांडे, हमारी कलीग नाली इले, हम आप सबसे विदा लेते हैं। थैंक यू सो मच। नमस्कार।
थैंक यू।